everybody, and welcome to this noon session about redundancy. It's a thorny topic, and the whole point of this session is to talk to those of you who've been made redundant and really talk about how that feels and what you do and what you should do next. I am Eleanor. I'm the founder of Noon, and I actually founded Noon having been made redundant myself. So this is a topic on which I have a lot to say and I really mind about. And I've got with me today two other experts on redundancy, because it's one of those things where you feel like you're the only person it's ever happened to. And actually what you discover is all the best people have been made redundant. But often people don't talk about it. It's one of those things that can be a real, it can be shameful. You feel kind of quite humiliating. I felt like my identity had been taken away because I've been doing that job for half my life, a quarter of a century. So I think it's a really thorny topic, and it's one that we don't discuss enough. And I think we need to lance the shame around it if we're going to kind of get to personally, it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. But if someone had said that to me on the day that it had happened, I would probably have punched them. So I think it's one of those things that can feel horrific in the moment, but actually ultimately can be something which is, not as terrible as we think it is. So welcome to you if you're watching us live on LinkedIn or YouTube or on our Facebook. Hello. And if you're watching on catch up, welcome to you too. It'll be just as relevant second time round. So Claire, Claire is you can tell us more about you, but you're really an occupational therapist. You worked in the NHS for years, focusing on transformation. And now Claire helps people with the transition from jobs into something else, and with other kind of big transitions as well. So Claire, do you want to tell us a bit about your story? And then we'll come on to Jennifer, who is Jennifer Howes is my editorial director at Noon. She and I both worked together at the Times for a long time. And Jen's had her own experiences of this too, which she'll also kind of fill in, and then we'll start talking about some specifics. But if you're on the chat and you've got some questions you'd like us to ask, do put them in the chat, and we will we'll try and deal with them as the session goes on. So Claire, tell us a bit about your story.
Yeah, sure. So thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join you. So my story, I worked in healthcare, and the wonderful thing about healthcare is if you have a need to be needed, that is the place to work, because there is an insatiable need when it comes around to health. So I worked as an occupational therapist and then worked nationally for the NHS. I was made redundant in 2020. I think it's fair to say it was a joint process in terms of I knew that there was a major restructure happening within the NHS, particularly national organisations. So I knew for about 6 to 9 months that this was going to be the likely outcome. And the reason I mentioned about the need to be needed is that even though it was something that I had preparation for, I felt really quite lost when it happened. And I felt that I wasn't necessarily needed. I realized how much I linked my identity and my purpose to my work. Anyone would ask me, what do you do? Or tell me a bit about yourself. I would always start with work. And to be honest, I had sacrificed lots of things with family in pursuit of my career. And, Eleanor, I know you talk about, and we spoke about a few weeks ago, we're pioneers where we have it all, and we have family and career and accolades and whatnot, and so I found it very difficult. My story is that I would tell people about it, and I think that's where, but deep down inside I felt really, I think shame was probably the right word to describe it. So that was my experience.
Yeah, and Jen, how about you? How did it work out for you?
Well, I've been lots of people these days, I think. I've been made redundant a few times. I remember when I was kind of earlier on in my career, when I was working in New York, that was during the dot-com bubble. And then suddenly people started being laid off. And it was this phenomenon where it seemed like before that, if you were a professional, you didn't really get laid off. There wasn't this usual cycle of, hiring up and then letting loads of people go and then hiring up and letting loads of people go. And so it quickly became obvious that this was something everybody was experiencing in their career. So it happened to me there. It happened to me at the times where Eleanor and I met, where I was part of a big cull. And from there, I went to set up Brit Moms, the influencer agency I ran for more than a decade with a business partner. But more recently, I was working at another company and was made redundant. And I think the thing is, even though we know it happens to the best people, and often it's about restructuring, it can be, sometimes I guess it could be about you, but often it's about the business and what the managers are thinking and where the business is headed, perhaps. But that sense of being really ashamed of it, and that, Claire, I totally get that kind of devastation. Eleanor, you talk about it in your book, Much More to Come. I think that sense of feeling it so personal, but also then not knowing how to talk about it. Because as an editorial person and also somebody plugged into tech and whatnot, I thought I have lots of different skills, but if I go out there and I'm like, hey, I'm looking for work, like right now, that I'll just project this kind of, desperation. And I think that's something we see at Noon in our circles or people we talk to, that not only that sense of being adrift, but that sense of how am I supposed to talk about this where I don't look and feel like a sad sack. It's a real challenge.
Yeah, I think that that's really difficult, and I think it also can be very powerful. So for me personally, after I was let go from the Sunday Times, which I write about kind of in quite a lot of detail in my book, and that kind of sense of when it happens, that real sense of kind of feeling like you're in a car crash. I remember that having that sense of kind of being on the ceiling, almost kind of watching it happening like it was really kind of happening to someone else, because it was such a sense of one part of my life really being kind of over. It was a really strange feeling of kind of almost witnessing your own death. And I also kind of knew in that moment that there was no kind of way back within that organization, or actually I think within that career. And I think that for many of us, when we're quite senior somewhere and we get let go, it's not like you can get another job like that in another place, because there are so few of them around. And also for me, I kind of really felt that I'd gone as far as I was going to go as an editor. I was chair of Women in Journalism, I was editorial director of the Sunday Times, editor of the magazine. I was about as senior as you could be. There were only it was about maybe one rung above where I was. And you're not going to get one of those jobs kind of a rung above if you've been let go the kind of rung below. So I think there's also that sense for us in midlife when that happens, that it's not just the end of your stint in that place, but kind of ongoing in your career, but it's also the end of a chunk of your life. And I felt that I kind of knew that as it was happening. But I think, the other thing that we've really learned at Noon about that kind of moment is how important it is for people to be able to talk about it. I wrote about it in the Telegraph, and I had about 10,000 people get in touch with me saying, this has happened to me too. And it's a really weird thing, redundancy. It is a bit like death, that people feel that A, they don't know what to say, and B, it is like a bit of it's a bit like a bereavement for you from everything that you've had before. And also, I think that you feel very outcast from tribe. And that was one of the reasons that I set up Noon, because when it happened to me and I looked around me, I couldn't see anything out there that was saying you're not done when you hit kind of 50, particularly as a woman. And I thought it was incredibly important to start a new conversation about reinventing I was 49 when it happened to be, so reinventing kind of at 50 in midlife. And 5 years ago, that was really not a conversation you were seeing anywhere at all. So that's why I think that these conversations are really important, because we inspire others by what we've done when it's happened to us. And we see that over and over again in our new circles. On Monday night, there was a woman who came in and had literally been made redundant that day. Quite a few who'd been made redundant and got divorced in the last few weeks, which is really what we talk about as the kind of midlife collision. But the most important thing that we talk about at Noon, and what I feel passionately about, is that that we do see in our research as well, that at 50 or in midlife, a whole chunk of life comes to an end for many of us. But rather than seeing it as kind of life just kind of going to a finite point and it being over, what we really know is that some things end, but then more things grow in their place. So rather than it feeling like the end of the circle, I see it as the beginning of a figure of 8. So you've completed the bottom one, and there's a whole other circle to come. That's why my book's called Much More to Come. But we have to get through this real pinch point in the middle, and to do that, we need each other, we need support, we need some inspiration, and we need to know that we need somebody to hold the hope and say, this is not the end, this is just the kind of end of the beginning. What do you think about that, Claire?
So I love how you describe that. And one of the reasons why I set up We Pivot was about, there is a beauty in the vulnerability. In in my many years in clinical practice, working with people who had really had, very difficult, circumstances, spinal cord injuries, or, severe strokes, there is that vulnerability in that moment. And, as we look at spirituality as the most important bit to our person. So it can be many things for many people, but essentially what is it that gets me up out of bed and gives me meaning other than myself? And my experience is in the vulnerability of a major life transition, be that something like redundancy, something like retirement from your primary career, or a major, health issue. There's a beauty in the vulnerability, because, if we can give ourselves the opportunity, and it might need to be guided, but I love the work of Noon, where people have that safe space to be able to, within your circles, to be able to speak about it. But the beauty in that vulnerability, to be able to look, actually, what is this about? And I don't know if you recall, Eleanor, but I remember I had a really seminal moment, and really interesting coming full circle on it now, because in 2022 my husband broke his leg in 3 places skiing, and I know it was mad. And our daughter had COVID, and anyhow, I had to go out and get him. And I remember coming home and him saying, and I looked out when it came to husband, so this is nothing against him, but it was a really seminal moment for me. But he said, oh, we really must thank Lex and Richard for all they did. And I was like, what the F? Look, and I could see what I had created. I'm not saying it's my fault, but I had a part in it, right? Of what I had created, of being the center of everybody else's world. And it was a really important turning point for me. And I just remember going up, I wept there with him, and then, shot obscenities towards him. But it was a great, but we're still here, 4 years later, he's still here, and he's still gone skiing. But the beauty of that moment, of that vulnerability, is something to be nurtured, not rushing into new things, but something to be held, and all that experience that we bring.
Yeah.
I think that,
what do you think about that, Jen? So in the aftermath of your redundancies, what did you do?
Well, I look at the aftermath of my redundancy and think, oh, if only I knew then what I know now. Because I think, especially in midlife, redundancy, when you're kind of 40s and onward, it's different from redundancy when you're in your 20s or 30s because of the way you're viewed in the marketplace. Where you are in terms of your skills and your abilities. Eleanor, you'd mentioned a bit of that. Like, you get to a certain senior level and it's not like, oh, I'll just go out and find another senior level job that's exactly like the one I've just let go of. That talk and support, I think that's that first step. And I think that's one that a lot of people, it's easy to, that's what I did. I forgot about that. I retreated into myself. And we see at Noon, it's so important to get out there and talk to people, and they don't have to be your friends. And that, in a way, can be a real safety element when you come to an organization like, a network like Noon, where you can talk to people who they've experienced something similar, but they're not your close friends. They're not colleagues. Because, as Eleanor likes to say, often people seem to think being made redundant is catching. It's like some kind of communicable disease. So that talk and support is so, you need that. And I think we often hang back because we're embarrassed or confused, or, it seems shameful. So finding that new tribe where you can speak honestly about everything from those feelings of shame to saying there's got to be more out there, whether that's even just connecting to nature for a moment, or expressing a vulnerability, or exploring new things. Giving yourself a break like that. But I think also it's very important at this time in midlife, when you're made redundant, is you have to think more strategically, both about what you want and your skills or what you could bring to a role. I mean, that's something that we do with our Rebrand Yourself course. We see so many people who they've been made redundant, sometimes made redundant multiple times, and they've got all these experiences and all these abilities, and not just hard skills, but soft skills. You get stuck into talking about them and thinking about them in, here's my job description way. And it's only when we break out of that we can actually find something that buoys us, or that we're excited about, and actually then get that feeling inside that lands us that new position, whether it's in what we're doing now or something completely different. But I think that thinking strategically, everyone's freaking out now about AI. And I don't mean that to sound like it's misplaced. It's pretty disruptive. But, it's important that we have to both be kind to ourselves and find a new tribe. Then we also need to think strategically about what we want and really do a deep dive. And that's kind of what Eleanor, you talk about that in your book, how you did that. And having gone through the rebrand process with her, I just realized I went from thinking I've got no skills, or I've got these skills right here that align with certain KPIs. But actually it's like, oh, I've got all these other kind of abilities that now I know how to talk about.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and we see a lot that I was talking about it on the online circle that we did with Noon last night, where a lot of the women don't know their own superpowers, and I think that our superpowers are often the things that come to us so easily, so instinctively, that we just assume everybody else can do them. So one of the questions I ask people always is, what do people come to you for? What's the thing that, your friends kind of go, oh, will you just do this for me? Because they know that you're good at it, which you maybe don't even see in yourself. And for me, I've always been a storyteller. I've been a journalist. I've been an editor. But I didn't realize that actually one of my superpowers is the ability to really kind of quickly and concisely kind of sum up the kind of essence of something. And also to kind of use that to speak truth to power. But actually in my kind of own reinvention, Jen and I were laughing about this earlier, because we were thinking about sometimes in the aftermath of a redundancy, when you're in the kind of pivot, the kind of what next phase, it's kind of quite important, I think, not to A, jump back on the same horse, but B, to just accept that you're in a kind of phase of what I called putty for a while, that maybe you're not going to know what you're going to do next. And everybody asks you, they go, oh, so what are you going to do next? And it's quite hard to go, actually, I've got no idea, because you kind of feel like because they're asking you, you should know, even though it's only happened to you the day before and you've been doing that for 25 years. So what I say to people is say, actually, I don't know, I'm going to be putty for a while, I'm going to try a few things out. And that can be doing some things that you would never have thought that you might do. I mean, I was just saying to Jen that a friend of mine's husband is currently riding a motorcycle as a kind of motorcycle career. He was quite a high-powered kind of film person. But, you know, he's making some money doing that at the moment while he works out his options to go back and become a lawyer. Or I've got another friend who's working in a bookshop in her kind of small town. She was a very high-powered lawyer and it all kind of went a bit wrong. But she said she's actually kind of quite enjoying that. I mean, personally, Jen and I became really good friends because one of the things that we did during lockdown when we were trying to make some money was we went off to Cyprus together and interviewed someone to do a kind of marketing book about psoriasis, of all things. And Jen and I were put up in a hotel in the strip in Cyprus. And, you know, it was definitely not either of us as professionally proudest moment. But we did have a hilarious time. And it certainly kind of became the bedrock of our kind of working relationship. So I think in all these things, I realized that this ability to sum up the essence of people was really useful. I did a lot of media training of kind of CEOs and things, not something that I had ever really thought I would do. But all of those things but actually that's been super helpful in the creation of our rebrand course, which has become one of the real pillars of Noon. So I think that in the aftermath of redundancy, one has to be quite open-minded about what it might look like next and be prepared to pivot and to also really ask ourselves this really powerful question, which is the question that launched Noon for me, which was, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And I had this really strong sense that there were all these people in midlife feeling a bit lost and that actually I could help them and that was what I wanted to do. And it was a friend of mine who became my first investor who said, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And I articulated this idea for Noon. And, you know, it kind of all stemmed from that. So I also think it's really important at this point, if we've been made redundant from something that we've done for a long time, to actually dream big, to go, this may be the last big chance I have to do something, you know, really exciting and new in my life, and to, you know, to be a bit brave about what we might do next, and to give ourselves some time to bring that vision about. What do you see with your clients, Claire? What do you say when people come to you going, help? What do I do next?
So what I offer on a one-to-one basis is highly bespoke. So it will be, you know, different things, but there are certainly commonalities. And, you know, if you have the privilege of being able to have a period of time to be able to, you know, have that putty time, I love that. That is wonderful. I think what's important is, in my experience, and the evidence is quite strong around this, is that period of almost like a grieving, you know, the grieving period. And, you know, don't make any big decisions if you've been afforded the privilege to be able to not work for a period of time, to not make any major decisions. But there's something that's really big, which is around an ending. And this for me is a really big thing, which is, you know, ending something and not bringing, and I hate, it's an overused term, but the baggage from before into the baggage from before, who I was before. And then this really horrible thing happened to me, and who I'm going to be. And I'm going to be really strong and brave and not bring it into my new thing. And there I have seen many people fall at the first fence taking that approach. It's not going to be like that for everyone, but things certainly like rituals of saying goodbye. Eleanor, we were chatting about rituals a couple of weeks ago, and I've done rituals with people and encourage people to do rituals to say goodbye, you know, and that might be writing a letter to your career or to your past career, or those, you know, that horrible person in the office who made your life a misery, you know, writing a letter and finding peace. And there's no reason that somebody can't do that. I mean, they can do that with a qualified person like me, or a friend, or, you know, there are lots of different ways that you can do that. Burning something is really quite good. You know, it's a
Not
great,
not your old.
That's really funny. But
not the whole office.
No. There is rituals are so powerful. They're so powerful, and even small things like making you sure, you know. I know your experience was that you were out on the spot, as it were, Eleanor, and I don't know if that was the same for you, Jen, but you know, that ability to say goodbye, whether or not you post the card, but just writing a letter of some kind. And some people use videos. I've worked with somebody who had an extramarital affair, and that they had a lot of guilt relating to that. Now, it's not my job, it's none of my business about that. My business is about the impact of the transition for them, and they found it particularly freeing. And how it was manifesting for them was they felt like they were walking through mud, right? And they had this big thing that had happened in the workplace. And of course, it brought back all the feelings, which is perfectly natural and normal. But we were able to, you know, we did some therapeutic work with it. But this person did a ritual around thanking them for their career and everything it brought them, and actually the really difficult things too. So people come to me, so I do, if you can afford it, to have some time out, that putty time. I completely agree with that. The talking to people, spending, it's, you know, it's an opportunity to re-meet yourself, you know. And it sounds I was going to say it sounds a bit American. I don't mean it like that, Jen, but it's like, I mean that positively, but it really is an opportunity to re-meet yourself, you know. And just the power of a good cry, and then being able to recognize. And I think queenagers, and I just love the term, and I'm from a small village in Tipperary in Ireland, and I have introduced the word queenagers to that village, Eleanor, Bersicane. I put it on Facebook the other day, so they're like, oh, we love this. But this, a good old cry is great. And then, you know, normalizing it, you know, being frustrated, being angry, going through all of those things, the confusion that comes with it. And it doesn't mean that you've necessarily tipped over into something that might require you to visit your GP, but it's understanding the where the boundaries are around that. But, you know, to your point about, you know, so many people, queenagers, have had so many major life transitions by the time they come to, for example, being made redundant, that we realize how strong we actually are, how much we carry for everyone. And, you know, like for the whole house, and, you know, or, you know, whatever it might be, workplace. But, you know, I think about my own example, how much I carry for the whole family. And part of me loves it, don't get me wrong. Part of me loves that I know exactly what's in the fridge and the thing. And then I'm, you know, cursing the other part of the time, going, somebody help me. So there's an element of a dichotomy there. But I think there's an opportunity to really see your strength, which you get through your vulnerability, and which is why, going back to my point about the beauty of the vulnerable position that you've been put in.
And just to, I think that's really important on the kind of emotional steps. I think it would be also important here to offer some kind of practical help for somebody who's kind of made redundant. So what are your kind of top tips as a kind of, you know, OT and someone who's seeing people through transitions, Claire? What do you say? So they walk into your and saying, I'm made redundant, I need to get another job. What do you do next?
Yeah. So we, as occupational therapists, occupation means activity in the true sense of the word. So we look at all aspects of your life. Work being one of them. And we will look at things that might be small niggly health problems, or things that you're concerned about that you don't want to become bigger health problems later on. I will work with somebody one-to-one or in groups, and if we've gone through the emotional stuff, as it were, and the process, the practical things that people can do is excuse me, looking about keeping yourself busy during the day, right? So a time for putty, and then a time for, so there's a concept that we call occupational balance. So there's lots of chat about work-life balance, which is a 2D way of looking at life. It's either work or life. As occupational therapists, we recognize that people are much more complex than that, and we need what we call occupational balance. So the right amount of activities, the right variety, the right frequency, the right intensity. Okay. And it's a fluid state.
So give us some examples.
Some examples. Okay.
So give us some examples of what might be the right balance.
Yes. So in a given week, I will need to have some some intellectual stimulation and work. I'll need to have some challenge with that. I'll also need to have some, so I'm an avid rower, I will need to have that quiet time. I will also need to feel whole and complete by doing washing for my family and putting it on the line. I couldn't do that all day. And knowing that I've made a good... Go ahead, Eleanor.
So it's about finding a kind of balance of the... So it's about finding a balance of the things, or actually beginning to think about a kind of personal recipe for what would make us feel happy in our life.
Yes, and healthy, right? Because it all links to our health. So when we look at something very 2D like work-life balance, but we're not just work and life. We're far more complex than that. We need the social connection, we need affection, we need interests, we need to not be sedentary, but we need some sedentary. We need a variety of things, and an occupational balance is a tool that you can use, which gives you a state at any one given time where you can see, actually, I need to put in a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that. It's a bit like making your own sandwich, bespoke sandwich just for you with just the right amount of mayonnaise. Sorry.
Yeah, but I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about it, because I think too many of us, particularly if we've been working in very intense jobs for a long time, and I really like the way you put that, because it's something that I've found in a more organic way over the last 5 years. So actually, usually between 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock, I'm in the pond. I go swimming every day, and I have a kind of shot of cold water and nature, and I now usually kind of program all my time around that being possible. So I know for me, I need to meditate in the morning. I need to have gone for a swim. I need some kind of time, a bit of time to kind of like potter around the house and make sure that my clothes are put away, maybe do some cooking. I sometimes joke actually that I now do so much kind of wellness that I hardly have time to do anything else, certainly compared to my old life. But then I also need quiet kind of, quiet time for writing. Productive time for meetings with the rest of my new team, time to spend with the women kind of in the community, time to kind of go and give maybe something back in a kind of broader way, or do some journalism. So I think this idea of writing out what your own perfect life sandwich or your recipe for your own personal happiness is, I think that's a really powerful tool for anyone who's made redundant and is thinking about what next. And the other thing that I would add into the mix is, what ingredients can you change? Because we start to think saying, yes, you can be putty, but maybe you've got to make money. But what I'm saying is maybe you can make money by doing something, which isn't as time consuming and all consuming as the job that you used to do, so that you can begin to get a sense of what this happier sandwich might be going forward. And I think that not enough of us do that we don't take, for me, that happened in a very kind of organic way over the last few years. I've realized, what made me feel happier. But I think for a lot of us who've defined ourselves by our jobs, and you're right that I think teenagers are one of the first people to do that, we've got so into a slightly treadmill mentality of equating our kind of happiness with busyness. And for me, that kind of busyness, that work busyness, is as much of an addiction as, you know, being addicted, being an alcoholic, or, you know, and I think that for me, I had to kind of wean myself off the need for the kind of dopamine hit of how many people needed me on my phone at any one time. So I also think there's a big kind of nervous system kind of shift that needs to happen, isn't there? It's kind of taking ourselves out of what has been our normal, our kind of situation normal, maybe for a long time, but maybe which isn't very healthy.
And, yeah. Oh, sorry, Jen, you go ahead.
I was just going to say quickly, it's interesting. Earlier this week, I was reading something by Aviva Wittenberg-Cox. She's a member of Noon and the longevity expert. And she was writing about how, you know, in the talking about the 100-year life and the 4 quarters, which we, you know, won't go into that too much. But the fact, she said, you know, we think of the kind of 20s, 30s, 40s, like it's all compressed, where you're supposed to create a career and have a family and buy a house and do most of your savings to prepare for, you know, the second half of life. And I think even that, along with that sandwich idea, that we have that we've got more time than in previous generations, but that it maybe is not the greatest template of the super busyness, as Eleanor was saying, this like, how many people need me on my phone right now? Or that sense of, you know, you can't go on holiday because you're too important, yet you're also not so important that they can't let you go at any moment. So I think when you think about that, and you think we're going through this transition, we as a kind of group of people, a demographic, but also I think there's this shift in the way we're thinking about work, where it's like, it shouldn't all be crammed into that one little bit. There's a whole other chapter. And you look at what a lot of the women at Noon are doing and the kind of things they're doing at their next chapter. I mean, not to mention, you know, Eleanor having created Noon, which I'm so happy to be part of. It's like, yeah, you can pivot, you can do something new and exciting, and we'll find a whole other kind of meaning and satisfaction in life that wasn't whatever came before. And maybe those bits that came before weren't quite you don't really want to go back to it.
Yeah. You don't want all the pickle, right, in the sandwich. So there, and if I could bring us back to the point you made, Eleanor, and you were leading to as well, Jen, was around cortisol levels, you know, our cortisol levels in our nervous system, you know, and our addiction to busyness. And, you know, this treadmill that we find ourselves on. And, you know, it doesn't make us more productive. I mean, studies have shown that, you know, more time at work does not necessarily make us more productive. And you go into what can be called occupational overload, right? So you can have an occupational overload where your cortisol levels are really high and you're running on empty. And then you can have the opposite, which is occupational deprivation, which is, I don't have enough to do. I don't have enough of the right type of challenges and relaxing that I need to. And, you know you spoke, I love the cold water swimming, Eleanor. And so I mentioned before rowing. People say to me, why do you like rowing? And I was like, well, as soon as it's hands on the boat, I have to stop talking. And what a joy that I have to stop talking. I don't have to make any decisions. I don't have to know where anybody's shoes are or any of those things are. I just have to do what the Cox tells me to do. And that for me is just as important as doing my work things, you know, and that's what helps me restore my balance. But it's dynamic. It's never perfect.
And I think what's really interesting there, Claire, is now when I go back into things that I used to do without really thinking. So I used to do a lot of breakfast TV. I was on Lorraine a lot. I used to review the newspapers, or I would kind of, just go on the radio and not think about it. And what I realize now, because my cortisol level is so much lower, and I think I'm so much less armored than I used to be, is that when I step back in to do those things, I really feel the toll that it takes on my body. I'm more anxious. I don't sleep so well the night before. I can feel the kind of, the cortisol running through my body, and a stress level, which is now not normal for me. And I really it makes me really think about how pleased I am that I am no longer living in that completely solid cortisol state, which I think probably would have been very bad for my health going forward if I'd kind of gone on doing it in later life. So, and I think the kind of point of that is to say that sometimes redundancy from the thing that we think has defined us, that has been this huge kind of part of our lives, actually maybe, but not doing that after a while at midlife will allow us to live longer and be happier, and maybe learn a new way to be in the world, which is not so dependent on a kind of dopamine hit, a very high cortisol, this kind of feeling of having to be busy. And also I think that removing a lot of that stress allows us to start to actually, for me, it made me think about why I'd been so drawn to that kind of job in the first place. There were a lot of things around achievement that were very important in my family. And in a way, when I stopped doing the achieving, it made me realize, wow, why did I feel that my whole sense of self was so bound up with achievement rather than just me being alive, being enough? And I think that there are a lot of, I know this from the circles, that there are a lot of very high performing queenagers who are really quite trapped in that kind of achievement cycle. And that actually maybe one of the key bits of becoming, I talk about becoming the woman you wanted to be as a queenager in midlife, is really beginning to have a look at the shadow, as Sue Darrensall, who's a Jungian therapist and who runs our Guildford Circle, talks about it, and understanding maybe that some of our drivers haven't been that healthy.
And I wondered if I may, so you were describing your experience. I agree completely about our drivers not being healthy, and you describe your experience of going back into say a TV studio. When our nervous system, when our sympathetic nervous system is in fight or flight mode, which is where cortisol's racing all around, adrenaline's racing all around, and it is obviously necessary for to stop us being run over and things like that on the street. So it is an important, anxiety is an important thing. Something that I see happening a lot is, and I have absolutely experienced, has been that I shut down between my mind and my body. I have a disconnect between my mind and my body. And when I go into those situations that I used to be in before, my body knows so much more. So I have much more of a reaction to it because I'm more in tune to my body. Don't get me wrong, I am not perfect, but we store a lot of our stuff, right? No, do you know what I mean? But like, we store a lot of our I don't want to use it loosely because it's a big term that's overused, but we store a lot of trauma in our bodies as women. I do. I put on weight when I'm in an over stimulated state, and that's where I found myself when I was made redundant. And I remember my family saying it to me, and I hadn't even noticed, and I was so properly noticed, and I was so disconnected. But now, and our mind and body, they're not separate. They're exactly the same. They're so interlinked. And in we pivot, and in occupational therapy, we take an holistic approach. So we see you as a whole person, as opposed to a physical person or a broken leg or but that connection between our bodies and our minds. And the studies around cold water swimming, Eleanor, and I'm an ex-cold water swimmer because I do more rowing now, but the studies around the impact of that, of us really becoming aware of what's happening in our bodies. And I wonder, was that experience going into the studio, your body, you know, I don't want to, just as a suggestion, it might have been, you're so much more aware of it, right?
Yeah, no, I think totally, but I also now see that as a real gift.
Yes.
And I think that you know, it's easy to see redundancy, you know, as a kind of humiliation or a kind of, you know, status downgrade, you know, and, you know, yes, that certainly was the case. I wore this huge cloak of power, but I am so much happier, I think gentler, calmer, kinder, much more authentically myself in my kind of post-power phase than I ever was when I was in it. And so I actually think that that's a really important thing around, you know, maybe the end of that kind of chapter of those kind of big corporate careers, particularly for women, where I think our values can be very at odds with the cultures that we're within. And we were talking about this yesterday, actually. I was talking about this with another coach about how that disjunct between one's values and what one's being kind of made to do all the time or doing all the time really kind of pushes us to burnout, and also pushes this massive disconnect between who we really are and who we really feel we'd like to be in our most authentic self, and the way the workplace, particularly the corporate workplace, expects and demands women to be. And I think I talk a lot about this thing about women being, the corporate world liking women being rather pleasing, physically pleasing, and kind of, you know, emotionally pleasing, and providing rather a lot of social oil and kind of fawning to more senior male bosses. And I think that when we get to midlife, I think we just don't want to do that anymore. I now, if I'm in a situation where I've got to kind of really pander to a kind of male ego, actually makes me, I can feel it in my body. It makes me angry. I don't want to do it. I don't want to be there. And I think that there is a link between the exodus of a whole generation of women from the workforce as they hit 50, when they come into their power, when they're no longer prepared to fawn as much, where they feel like they've actually got 30 years experience and they know what they're talking about. They're not just going to be grateful and pleased to be there. And I don't think that it's a accident that kind of, that tendency to kind of speak out or to call a spade, or not to just go, oh, thank you for letting me be in your meeting, coincides with the big exodus of women from those kind of corporate workforces.
I think too, it helps having experience and coming to this understanding about all these things y'all are mentioning. When you read even job postings, and there's some I've read, you know, when I was looking, and it was, well, they were perfect for me, except they had these lines that were like, if you live and breathe, blah, 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 you know, you love, you know, thinking about something 24/7. It's like, no, I don't do that anymore. No, thank you. Because you got to say that's what the company's priority will
Porn
be.
Bell, who I interviewed.
Because you
sorry, Jen.
No, I was finished. I just like, you see those job postings, and I think, God, it seems so old fashioned. I don't think even young people, you know, respond to those in the same way that, you know, we used to maybe 10 years ago. And certainly that's, when we talk to younger women, they're in their late 20s and 30s and they're already feeling burned out.
Yeah. I was interviewing this woman, Porn Bell, who's written this book called She Wanted More. I interviewed her on Sunday for International Women's Day on our Substack Live. And one of the things that she talks about in that book is the bodies that break your body and soul. Jobs that break your body and you break your body and soul. And dancing around maniacal kind of bosses. And I think, you know, I think that there is a point where we've kind of had enough of that, and the corporate world has not really shifted as much as we've kind of wanted it to. So I also think that there's a correlation here between all these women being made redundant at 50 and a kind of corporate world which doesn't really value our voices. And therefore my strong message to someone watching this, if that's you, is you may well find yourself much happier in your next chapter, even if you're, you know, less rich and outwardly status, you know, bestowed. You may actually find a much larger sense of contentment in rowing your, you know, paddling your own canoe, maybe setting up your own business, or, you know, doing something different from here on.
I wonder, I was thinking exactly that. So a friend of mine, Catherine, and I know she's listening, and she's given me permission to share her story. So she was made redundant quite recently, and we had a cup of coffee. I think it was a couple of days after she had left, and worked in big pharma in patient advocacy. I mean, just, you know, and incredible person. And she was reflecting to me about that jobs that she was looking for on were quite like, didn't relay to the skills and experience that somebody had brought. So jobs for over 50s, we'll say, there was, it must have been where she particularly looked, but there was a real bias towards more less challenging and skillful jobs than somebody for under 50. And I don't know if you guys have experienced that, or what your experience from Noon is on that, of people going back into the job market.
I mean, we find, I mean, people I talk to, they say, I mean, seeing a job description and getting the job is very difficult. I mean, we work with a partner, and they have jobs from companies that are specifically like, yes, we want that experience of those people. But I mean, there's definitely the feeling that seeing a job you like and are perfect for and applying is not the way you're going to get it. Eleanor,
yeah, I think there's a real problem with. I think there's a real problem with the algorithm. We see that a lot, that there are a lot of more senior, older people getting just knocked out by an AI algorithm before they get in the door. And we also see, which I think is really bad, that some of these more specialist recruiters who are kind of placing queenagers, say specifically in jobs, they find that women who've been knocked out by the algorithm, when they're actually introduced to the firm by the kind of recruiter and the more old-fashioned way, they absolutely love them and they're exactly what they're looking for. Yeah. So I think that there is a difficulty here with the way that the kind of AI algorithm around recruitment definitely can count against us. We see some women like knocking off when the dates say when they went to university, or the dates around their early career experience, because they don't want to be knocked out by the algorithm before they've even got in the door. But more in a more positive way, we do see, actually, I think in the last few months particularly, I've seen more queenagers coming in and saying they've just got another big job. And we still see people definitely being whacked at 50, but we're also seeing some going back in. And it's also interesting that we're getting some corporate clients for Noon. BNP Paribas just become part of our corporate queenager program, who are really actively looking to retain their senior women, realizing that if they're going to get to their kind of diversity targets, they've got to keep the women in the game. And we did some really interesting program with National Grid, where their head, President Cordy O'Head, she talked about elongating thinking about women's careers. So understanding that for a lot of women who've had a lot of caring responsibilities up to 50, they actually might want to really kind of power up. We find 70% of women at this point want to power up their careers. Lucy Ryan's research, who wrote a brilliant book called The Revolt, and she finds that 70% of women are now thinking, wow, this is my opportunity. I've got more time because my kids have left home, say, or I now am more confident and I really know what I want to do. But unfortunately, the working world isn't seeing us like that, which it needs to, given that we don't get our pensions till we're 67. So if we whack all the women out of the workforce at 50, there's a massive economic headache for the Treasury there, because we've got women live longer, they'd be putting less money in their pensions, and we don't want to see a lot of women in penury in their old age. And I think there's a real structural issue around that. And we know that that's something that Rachel Reeves is interested in. And Annalise Dodds, who was Keir Starmer's head of policy, gave me a big interview all about that and why it's important to keep queenagers in the workforce. So there's beginning to be a sense of we need to keep women in there. But I think against that is what I'm talking about, which is this gendered ageism piece around what are women for as they hit 50 and they get older. What does the corporate world value in female employees, which maybe isn't how we're presenting. And I think that there's a whole load of things there which need to kind of come out in the wash. So I think that if you're somebody who is trying to get back into a corporate job, don't give up. You can definitely do that. You've got kind of good marketable skills. It may take a bit longer to get back in, but what we're saying is, don't necessarily feel that's what you have to do, that in the 100-year life, 50 is halfway through, maybe you've done your corporate bit and actually there's a chance to become the woman you always wanted to be, go back to those kind of childhood dreams that you might have had of what you were going to do. And if that's the case, this is the moment, kind of seize the day, I think. Look at Claire, she's just set up a kind of her own consultancy. Jen and I have both very much pivoted kind of out of journalism into something else. And so I think my message is, trust yourself. You've got a lot of experience, a lot of talent, a lot of things which are all the reason you were able to do the big job that you've been doing. If that's what you've been doing, is because you're quite amazing, and that can be segued into something else. And don't believe that it can't. Claire, will you give us a kind of closing note? I think we're nearly at the end of our time.
Yeah.
And then we'll.
Yeah, I loved what you shared, and it was so relevant of that opportunity to do what is right for you, and all of those experiences that you've had in your life as a woman. And we carry a lot, and we bring a lot of light as well. That all those, my closing would be that it ain't the end, it's the beginning. It ain't the end, I think, is the best thing I could say.
Yeah, I think that's really true, and I think that's really at the heart. It's at the heart of what we're trying to do at Noon as well, as to say, much more to come. How about you, Jen?
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I feel like we've had such a good, wide-ranging conversation. Excuse me. I think there are things we can do now. If you've been made redundant recently, or feel you're at risk, or are experiencing that, you can make it better for yourself in the short term. And, some of the ways Claire's talked about. But then in the long term, you could end up being so much better off and really carving out a new niche and finding a new way. I've been there where it feels like that could never be possible, where, I was calling my sister crying, saying, I'm going to live in a cardboard box. And she was like, don't be ridiculous. But I think, that sense of combining the whole sandwich is such a really provocative and interesting idea. Think of your whole sandwich. Oh, and I will say, over the next coming soon, we have a little audio offering. So if you've been made redundant, it's some audio weekly updates you can get from Noon. We'll be rolling this up very soon. A little pep talk from Eleanor about what to do each week, which really kind of takes you through the process. So look out for that.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I think that this has been such a rich discussion, and I think that seeing a midlife redundancy as the opportunity for a reset, a rethink, a reboot, a reset, not just jumping back into what you know, could actually be the biggest gift that anyone can give you for the next quarter of your life, for your what my friend Rita Woodenberg Cox calls Q3. So my real advice is, don't necessarily think you're jumping back into the same thing. Really think about what you want to do next. And I love Claire's life sandwich about all that we could be, and really thinking about kind of what we want in there. I love the Mary Oliver thing, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? Or Oliver Burkeman's thing about we have 10,000 hours. So, maybe you've got about 4,000 left. Do you really want to spend that in a job that you're just doing to kind of, to pay the bills? Maybe you can reduce your bills and think about your life in a different kind of a way. So I hope that's been helpful food for thought for all of you listening. We'd really love to know what you think. And if this resonates with you, you do check out either my book, Much More to Come, published by HarperCollins, it was Times bestseller, or come to noon.org.uk. Come and check out what we offer and meet some other amazing women who can help you through. And huge thanks to Clare. Her company is called We Pivot. You can find her online, and she can kind of guide you through that if you if you've got some funds for some one-on-one. And I hope you found that her insights helpful. And thanks so much to Jennifer, as always, my brilliant editorial director and friend and also just remember, all the best people have been made redundant. It's really horrible when it happens. I really felt like I died. It was awful. And now I really do think it was one of the best things that's ever happened to me. So maybe that could be you too in a few years' time. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for all your lovely comments, and look forward to seeing you at a noon thing soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, and thanks to our lovely panel.